Frustration spilling out from behind closed doors inside the Illinois Capitol. What Democrats in charge at the State House are saying with just 2 days to go. And a new study digs into policing across Chicago without ShotSpotter. Let's get to the point.
From Chicago's very own, with WGN political editor Tahman Bradley, this is The Point.
Good evening. Illinois lawmakers are working tonight at the state capitol, and they're scheduled to keep going until the spring session wraps up Sunday at midnight. Before then, they must pass a budget. But to do so, the Democratic supermajority must reach agreement on a spending plan that matches revenue. That can be tricky in the best of times, but these are not. COVID-era federal money has dried up, and there is continued uncertainty about how much the state will get from Washington. The financial squeeze is raising tension among progressive Democrats and Governor J.B. Pritzker. Earlier, via Zoom, we caught up with Representative Will Davis from his desk on the House floor. State Rep Will Davis, thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.
I see that you're in the House chamber. Are you planning to just camp out there all weekend?
I might as well.
Let me ask you about revenue, because will some of the progressive revenue proposals pass, or will the governor's social media tax pass?
Well, I think we're looking at all of that. So the governor has put some revenue items on the table, but when the governor walks into the budget, he says, this is what I want to spend, and I'm giving you the money to fund what I want to spend. And if there's anything that you want to do outside of that, now you all have to come up with the revenue items. And so when you think about the Revenue Alliance and other advocacy groups that are supporting things like the digital ad tax, the billionaires tax, and things of that nature, they're saying, okay, well, here are some things that we all want you to consider. And I think some of the legislators are very much in favor of considering some of those items. The question will be, will the governor support those items? So don't put us in a corner where you've come up with revenue that you like to spend on what you want, and then be against revenue that we may like as legislators to fund the other things that you didn't want to fund in your introduced budget. So that's where sometimes the sticking points are and the rub is, if you will.
There's some reporting. The Illinois wrote a little bit about some Democrats being frustrated with Governor Pritzker this budget cycle. Is that happening? Is that accurate?
Well, I think there's always some frustration, because every year when the governor introduces his budget, it usually takes out some of the things that members have worked to put in. And it's just a song and dance that we do every year. When you think about violence prevention, every year the governor's introduced budget basically strips out all the violence prevention money that members like myself have put in to fund organizations in our communities that are trying to address violence. And there are other silos where members have asked for money to do certain things, but every year the governor's introduced budget takes all of that out, and there's always a fight to put it back in. So when you talk about frustration, it's just, well, why is what we want less important than what the governor wants? Whether it's about the viability of it or in and of itself, or is he trying to keep such a middle of the road posture because of his supposed potential future aspirations that he doesn't want to walk into it being the governor of a state that did all of this tax and spend stuff, because it doesn't play well on the national stage.
How much does that come up in private, Pritzker's possibly running for president?
Well, I mean, it's, as you could say, it's kind of one of the worst kept secrets in Springfield, if you will. That is truly his desire. I mean, he's put himself out there on the national stage, doing a lot of the national talk shows. So it's being said in other spaces other than just Springfield. So it's not just us saying it, it's out there. But nevertheless, if that's his desire, and that's great.
Are you saying that though? Are you saying that creates some tension, because you got to take care of your districts and you have to take care of the state while he's taking care of the state, but also maybe thinking ahead?
Well, tension is a strong word, but it does create a little tension between us, because again, for those of us who are not running for national offices or planning to run again as state representatives, we're still here. And we still have to deal with the challenges of the state, no matter what.
Let me ask you about the Bears. If the Senate sends you a revision of mega projects, essentially not doing mega projects. Instead, it's a deal for the Bears in Arlington Heights. Are there enough votes in the House to pass that?
Well, I think if quote unquote mega projects bill focuses solely on bears, and this is just my own opinion, would say no, there isn't. Because, like, for instance, I represent South suburban communities who would say, well, if we're going to make these efforts for the bears, then how come we can't make those efforts for things that we do in the South suburbs? You know, we have needs as well. So why should that bill be solely focused on just addressing kind of one issue, and that is the bears? If the governor has indicated that, well, you know, I'm willing to give them infrastructure, does that mean he's willing to give me infrastructure for my communities without them necessarily having to go through the IDOT processes that they're currently going through? So some of us are looking at it that it's something like that can't be just solely about the Chicago Bears. There are opportunities to do great things throughout the state, large-scale projects, and dare I say, I'm still trying to build an airport.
State Rep Will Davis, thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
A spokesman for Governor Pritzker responded tonight, saying in part, the governor introduced a fiscally responsible budget proposal centered on making Illinois more affordable for working families while protecting the state's long-term financial stability. In the face of President Trump raising gas prices, groceries, and other costs for working families, Governor Pritzker and his office are continuing to work with the General Assembly to deliver a balanced budget. We're back in 60 seconds. Next week, members of City Council plan to again press the Johnson administration about a replacement for ShotSpotter. The gunshot detection software was decommissioned almost 2 years ago. The mayor has long argued it's ineffective. Some aldermen disagree. A study out this week from UChicago Justice Project says police response times have actually improved without ShotSpotter in use. Professor Rob Vargas joins us now to talk about it. Welcome to The Point.
Thanks for having me.
Professor, police response times dropped 6 months after ShotSpotter got turned off. Compare it with the 6 months before it was scrapped. Did you find any evidence that ShotSpotter has a positive impact on reducing gun violence?
You know, we didn't really set out to evaluate ShotSpotter in particular. What we were doing, we're testing some claims and predictions that some community members and elected officials had about the decommissioning of ShotSpotter. These were predictions that crime was going to increase significantly and that response times to serious incidents were going to also get worse. And that was really the focus of the study. And what we did through like a very simple analysis was just look at response times to just test these claims and these predictions, and we found no evidence to support them. We found evidence, in fact, that police response times improved. We can't say exactly what drove those increases in response times, but again, that wasn't the point of the study. The point was to kind of bring some data to bear on some of the major concerns that some people had about the decommissioning.
Supporters of the text say there are many instances when nobody calls 911, and in fact, ShotSpotter would alert police to the fact that gunfire had occurred. Your study didn't really take that into account, did it?
No, but I would say that there are many studies that also point that by the MacArthur Justice Center and an economist at UC Santa Barbara, who found that around 90% of ShotSpotter alerts result in officers responding to a scene and finding no one. And there was an economist who looked at how responding to those kinds of dead-end calls were making it harder for police to respond to other incidents. And so I think while it's certainly true, as some of the supporters of the technology point out, that there are some people who are assisted by the technology, I think it's also important to bear in mind that there are other consequences for when police are responding slowly to other 911 calls, when they're showing up to a response and finding no one.
You know,
I just one more point, which is that it's important to weigh both of those. I'm not saying that one is more important than the other, but I think it's much more complex than just that one kind of example that a lot of people point to.
Debate over ShotSpotter has been very emotional. You have members of council and majority who want it. We recently had Peter Chico on, an alderman, also a Chicago police officer, saying it was an essential tool. But what do you make of the emotional connection that some people seem to have to ShotSpotter? What's driving that?
You know, I think that those emotions are real, and frankly, these are communities that have been given promises for many years and for many decades of investment and improving crime, and are rightfully hurt and skeptical about anything, and are pushing for something that they believe is helpful. And you know, I think that I think that it's important to distinguish between the concerns of crime victims, which are important, with questions about whether a technology is effective. And that those two dimensions are often pitched as things that are opposite of one another, where I don't think they have to be. Where I do think there's a scenario where, like, making sure that the technologies are delivered, whether it's ShotSpotter or whatever, making sure that these technologies are delivering on what they're promising is, I think, important in honoring both the victims of gun violence and also the officers who are out there using these technologies.
Professor Rob Vargas, thank you so much. Sorry, we're out of time. Tonight, a tip of the hat before we go to the Chicago delegation in Rome visiting the Vatican. The photos have been dripping out every few hours. The full group picture with Pope Leo is striking. Now, it's interesting to take note of who is there representing Chicago. Mayor Johnson is to the right of the Pope in the photo that's going to be coming up. And you'll see that there's a fascinating front row. We're just out of time. Good night.